Hello and welcome to this webinar, A Million and One Ways to Use eLearning. My name is John Wellwood, Managing Director and CEO of 100% Effective Limited, and we've also joined by Sophie, who's going to moderate us through this next 30 minutes or so. If you've got any questions, please type them in the text box and Sophie will either interject and ask them as we go, or we'll keep them to the end and we'll answer them at the end. As you'll see, we're going to try and use e-learning right from the very start to show you what it can be done with. But e-learning is one of these things that I think is very much underused and undervalued. E-learning has been around for decades. I remember when it used to just be a PowerPoint slide and you would read some notes at the side. It then sort of moved on a little bit and suddenly you got a voiceover giving examples of things. But since then, e-learning really has been transformed. It's now highly engaging, highly interactive. We use gamification, simulations, animation. We have exercises, knowledge checks. All these things are in there to capture the learner, to make sure that the learner truly can apply the learning and understand the learning as they go forward. Unfortunately, lots of people still have the perception of those older days of e-learning, where it was just a PowerPoint slide and you had to read them or you had that voiceover. And as a result, people are being constrained, in my opinion, on what e-learning can be used for. Today, what we want to talk to you about is the power of e-learning and how it can be used in different ways. If you do it right, there's hundreds of things that can be done using an e-learning approach. Typically, most companies and people go through a kind of journey of e-learning. I don't know where you are on that journey, but typically lots of people start by buying a system and then putting compliance type training on there. So they might end up putting their health and safety training or their anti-bribery training or their money laundering training or food hygiene, manual lifting, anything that you have to take, they put it onto their system. Typically, they do that because these are things that everyone has to do. So therefore, it makes it quite cost effective. And because everyone does it, you get that volume of people going through it. If that e-learning is not engaging and it's quite dull, then people again have this perception of that's all it's for. It's just a case of replacing a classroom training event, if you like. People then continue down their journey and they might say, well, we've done all this compliance stuff. What should we be doing now? And they'll look for other classroom training events that they can replace with an e-learning event. So it might be you decide, I've got a coaching training course. Can we change that and make that e-learning? It could be that we suddenly decide we want our presentation skills course to be done online. Or it could be that we want to make people creative. So we put a creativity course online to make that happen. So we genuinely just take our existing classroom training and we change it into what we hope is highly engaging and entertaining e-learning courses. And that's kind of where most people stop. They see it as a way to replace a classroom training course. In our opinion, there are millions of ways to use e-learning. We've used it ourselves in our own business to try and help people to understand things and look at things differently. And we want to share that with you today. We then want to talk about some other creative ways we see that you can use e-learning that we're doing with some of our clients. For me, the e-learning is really only going to be constrained by your imagination. But let's have a look at one or two little examples. So we have an induction program that we've converted into an e-learning package. The great thing about this is everybody does induction in some way or other. So we can have a system where you can even get people doing it before they arrive, but you make sure that the same message is getting put to everybody as they arrive at the training. It doesn't matter who the trainer is or the manager that does the induction. You get exactly the same information. You can train people and tell people about the business, what their expectations are. You can talk to them about health and safety. You can introduce people, so there's my face there, and make sure that everyone knows what's happening. You can also make sure that people really understand where things are. So in this example here, we're showing the layout of our office so people know where to go and get things. You can make sure that people understand the basic health and safety aspects of it. You can, I won't press these because they make a big sound, but you can hear what the sound of the fire alarm looks like, or who the first aiders are, and so on. You can go all the way through getting people to double check things, make sure they understand them. And the great thing about it is you can test knowledge all the way through. So induction training is just one way that you can use e-learning to move it forward. It's a fairly normal way, and lots of people do that. Another way, which not so many people do, is if you were launching a new product. So we launched this product back in January, and I wanted everybody in the company to understand why we were launching the product, what the product was we were launching, what the questions people would ask about them, how it would move forward, how to answer questions, what's included, price, etc. So we developed an e-learning package to do just that. The great thing from my perspective was I could make sure that everybody understood every single aspect of this product before we went live. So everybody had to take this test, take this e-learning, and pass the test at the end. We designed it so that you couldn't move forward unless you'd actually revealed all the key elements of each one of the courses. So in this aspect here, you can see the cost, you can see the duration, you can see what's included, the number of CPD points, etc. And you could do that for each one of the package of courses in the package that we were launching. So we could just move that through. I could then have complete confidence that everyone who was engaged in selling and doing customer service associated with this product truly understood it, because we did a knowledge check at the end. And before they passed the knowledge check, if they hadn't passed the knowledge check, they couldn't go and do the selling. So that was a slightly different way to use e-learning. We've also used e-learning to kind of make sure that people understand our systems and processes in the business. So one of the things we do is if we've got any issues in our e-learning, we get people to raise tickets. So we wanted to make sure that everybody understood how to raise a ticket. We then wanted to make sure everybody knew how to deal with that ticket as it went forward. So we developed this e-learning package to enable that to happen. So as you can see, it's very easy to move around, it gives lots of information, and it genuinely shows you how to use a system or process. So there's lots of different elements in this, so you can click various parts so you can understand what needs to happen. Yeah, and so on. Another way we've used e-learning is we've used it to gamify things. We've used it to put games into courses. We've used it as ways to educate people and get people to train things. So we have a game that we use in our e-learning for 5S, which is about sorting, organizing a place for everything in its place. So as you can see, there's a kind of gamification aspect of it, which makes it very engaging to the user. So all the way through, they're playing a game, but they're also learning. My 7-year-old just learned his 6 times table using a gamified game online, where he had to try and keep this guy on a skateboard moving along by getting the questions right about the 6 times table. And he learned that in half an hour because he was so engaged with the learning. And that, for me, is what it's all about. But e-learning really is constrained by the way you want to look at things. So there are hundreds of other examples of how e-learning could and is being used by different companies. Here are just some of them, and we've got some time to just quickly talk about them, but really it's your imagination that will limit it. Good e-learning for me is made up of 2 or 3 elements. The first element is the learning content aspect of it, where we show them something. And then we have some questions and tests and exercises to let people try it. And then we have a knowledge check at the end. And if we take that concept of content, a little bit of practice, and then a knowledge check at the end, that's when we can start using it a little bit more creatively. So for example, if we want to know that someone has actually learned something, right, we can get them and test them at the end of it. So here's just some ways that you could do that. An interesting one that one client has done is launching a new menu in a restaurant. So typically what would happen is that you would get the waiters and waitresses round a table, you would explain that there's a new menu, and then you would get them to listen to what's included, why it's being done, etc. The problem with that is not everyone will be concentrating, and you also don't know that they've actually learnt what you want them to learn about the new menu in this instance. By doing it in an e-learning way, we can do a 10 or 15 minute little snippet of a learning exercise, and we can get the chef to have a think about why he's done the menu that he has, how to present it to the person that's getting the meal. But more importantly, we can talk about what can and can't be changed in the menu, or allergies. And then at the end of that, we can then get them to do a test so that we know that they know all about that new menu. And for me, that's a really important thing. Show me you know, and then I can let you go live on a system. And we can also do that for changes in a process, changes in a system. So when we implement new process changes, we don't just want to go live with that new change without really knowing that everyone understands it. So a small little 10, 15-minute e-learning module with that knowledge check at the end means that I know that you understand that because you passed the test at the end. So no one can say, oh, nobody told me or I didn't know. We can use e-learning in that way. So we can look at changes, we can get it for new starters. There's different ways we can do it. We can also use it to try and communicate to people. We all know that what typically happens when we get a communication is it depends on who tells the message, who says it, what spin they put on it, how they make that happen. And what we can do with this is we can now have a very simple little communication package which has the knowledge check at the end, so we can check that people have really taken what we wanted them to do from that communication. We can also get feedback from them. So it could be that we do a performance update on the company, or we do a company overview to explain our values, our vision, what we're trying to achieve. It could be that we're doing a major change in the organization and we want to make sure there's a consistent message across the whole organization. So we could do the reasons for doing it. And we can even replace things like newsletters and make them highly interactive so that we can now get feedback and really understand what's going on. It could be that we want to make sure that people use the standards that we have in place. Yeah, excuse me. So that's really important. And it comes back to that show me you know. So if you had a little snippet that said, this is what happens if you don't follow the standards, that's educating and learning to people. We can then show what the standard really is. We can then make it real so that people realize how important standards are and what happens when we don't do them. Another interesting twist on this kind of e-learning is lots of industries, you have to show compliance. You have to show to some other body that you're actually complying to the standard. And for me, this e-learning does that. If we did an e-learning learning process on how to do that particular standard, and we then test people at the end, we can prove that people have had the training, understood the training, and are using it. It also is auditable, so that if people aren't doing it, we can come back and say, well, why? Because you've had the training. So I think that's an interesting use of e-learning going forward. It could be that what we also try and do is reduce the time that we are constantly asking managers to do this, that, or the other. So it could be how to fill in a holiday form. It could be, how do I do my expenses claim? Any of those small little constantly asked questions to managers, we could convert them into short little e-learning modules, and people can just go on the system, pick them and use them. So again, that's another sort of series of uses for using e-learning. We all want to reduce costs. So why don't we use e-learning to do that? Apart from obviously it's being cost effective using e-learning rather than a classroom training. What we could do, as I've seen some of our clients do, is they could start to show how the cost builds up in a process. So what we can have is, as you use something, it shows the cost of that thing. As it builds through the process, it shows how the costs build up and the consequence of making a mistake. And that will help people not to make mistakes or realize what's going on. So if I don't fill this form in, the consequence of that is X, Y, and Z. We've also seen people use e-learning to try and reduce calls to call centres. So why not use that and look at all the ways that people call us, why do they call us, what do they do, and develop slightly simple e-learning modules that will enable them not to have to call us. So we're working with some clients just now just to do that very thing, reduce calls to the call centre and give better customer service by developing short little e-learning modules that will enable that to happen. You could even use it for building flat pack furniture. We were doing this not so long ago, and it's very difficult to follow those diagrams and do those things. The other alternative would be a video, but they're dated, difficult, and very expensive to develop. However, an e-learning package would be very simple. You let people log in and they can build the package, look at it, and sort of follow it as they go on. So for me, there's lots and lots of different ways that we can use e-learning to sort of think differently. It could be that we even look at some of the kind of practical skills that are in life. So it could be that you train people in how to change a tire, or it could be that you try and make things happen in that way. Customer service is obviously really key. So the other thing you could do is start to use e-learning to sort of answer some of those customer service questions. So we all have frequently asked questions. Why not convert that into e-learning? Reduces the calls to our call centres, makes it easier for our customers, and therefore improves customer service. You could also have it so that customer service is more aware in the company. So you could train your people on customer service using e-learning and put different scenarios in there, get them to think differently, get them to look at what happens when it goes wrong. So you could have e-learning that shows the sort of spread of bad sort of experiences with customers, etc. So e-learning has lots and lots of different scenarios that can be used using that concept, which is all about learn some content, practice how to do something, and then be tested at the end. So as I said earlier, that show me you know, I think is extremely powerful. It's becoming more and more important that we really understand all these things as the fourth industrial revolution takes place. So the fourth industrial revolution is all about the use of drones to deliver things. It's the big data, it's automation of everything, and it's taking people out of the workplace and being replaced really by automation. As a result, we need, before we go live on any of these systems, to really make sure that everyone truly understands them. We need to show we know before we go live. People also need to have the ability to train and do things differently and very quickly. And e-learning for me is a great way of doing that. So e-learning is really about using it in as many different ways as you possibly can and not being constrained by that old thinking of it's just a PowerPoint slide with some voiceover over the top of it. It's so much more. We're already helping companies to develop this kind of different ways of using e-learning. And I think we're constrained by people's paradigms and people's imaginations. I mean, it could be just as simple as we currently have a process. So what we're going to do is we're not even going to do an e-learning on it. We're just going to do a little test on the standard operating procedure and get people to test whether they actually can use the standard operating procedure. So there's different ways to do it. And we've been lucky enough over the last couple of years to work with some fantastic clients to help them think differently about e-learning to try and make that happen. So it doesn't really matter where you are on your journey to e-learning. We want to help you launch into the new ways of making that happen. At the end of the seminar, or the webinar, we'll say to you, please come back to us and talk to us about where you are, what you're trying to do, what your constraints are. And we'll be very happy to set you up and have that kind of a conversation. So e-learning for me needs to be something that we look at in a different way. E-learning is more than just a PowerPoint slide. It's all about giving different examples how it can be used. So I hope that's made some sense. I hope it's opened your eyes a little bit. It's difficult in such a short period of time to go through and explain everything, but I think we've given you some ways that e-learning can be used, and there are obviously millions of other ways to do it, and we want to hear what other people are doing as well. In our last webinar, we talked about what good e-learning was and what bad e-learning was and what ugly e-learning was. And if you want to understand what really good e-learning is, that's a great webinar to go and listen to. And there's a link here for you to do that. But before we wrap up, Sophie, do we have any questions?
Hi, John.
Hi.
A few questions for you come through. So one of the first questions is, how easy is it to develop e-learning that's not a training course?
Okay, I actually think it's very easy. If I take, for example, a change to a process or a change to a system, typically we have it all written down, all the various steps that we want people to go through. We've checked it, we've analysed it, we've made it better. So it's just a case of putting a storyboard together of what those changes are, and then letting the developers pull it together. And it really doesn't take very much time at all. It probably only takes a week or so to pull something like you've just seen, because it's an e-learning package together. So it's not that difficult. The difficult bit is typically knowing what questions you want to be answered at the end for that show me, So it really is quite straightforward.
A similar question, how long would it take to develop an e-learning course that wasn't a training course?
That's a wee bit difficult because it depends on what it is, the e-learning that we're talking about. So it's kind of how long's a bit of string, really. But typically a short, 10, 15-minute e-learning sort of package, if you like, which I think most of these things should be aimed at. I think you're talking no more than a couple of weeks. It really is that straightforward. Once you understand what you want it to look like and your brand guidelines and all that kind of things out the way, then really it isn't that difficult to pull it. A couple of weeks, really, I think, Sophie.
And we have a bit of a different one. So we have more of a concern here. So I worry that using e-learning to replace so many systems and processes encourages the removal of face-to-face contact within a business. Is a happy medium possible? And if so, how would it be achieved?
I think we do need to have a happy medium of the use of e-learning and face-to-face. I'm not an exponent of just having e-learning. I think what we should have is a sort of amalgamation of them. So when we do our training courses, for example, we would call it blended. And I think that's the way all these things should go. So the e-learning is there for people that are in disparate areas, new people to come on, and then there should always be the ability to ask questions and engage with a human, if you like, to answer those more difficult questions that we might not have thought of. And then we need to take those questions and build them back into the e-learning so the e-learning becomes bigger and better all the time.
Okay, and we only have one more question, actually.
Okay.
So what would be a good way to roll out e-learning modules that are not training?
Okay, so for me, I would pick the areas that I wanted to work on, and I would pick a pilot one that I want to do, and I would give it a test, and I'd let people have a look at it and develop it. So first of all, you need to develop your style that you want it to be. Then you need to determine the content. Then you need to do the questions at the end. So that's pulling the package together. I would then pilot it with a small group, tweak that e-learning so it becomes more effective, and let it roll out to make that happen. But typically the journey, as I said earlier, starts with compliance, then it's classroom training. Then I think you probably need to look at some of your most important processes that you want to be standardized and make that into e-learning. Then I would look at maybe some areas where people wanted to develop, or that frequently asked questions type thing. So I think there's so many ways to use e-learning that I think it's an individual thing, and that's why I would encourage you to talk to us, fill in that questionnaire that we're about to show you at the end, so that you can sort of have a conversation, because there's a million different ways you can use it, I think.
That's great.
Is that our last question?
Yeah, that's all the questions.
Great.
Thank you.
That's great. No problem. I hope that was of use to the people listening. I think that e-learning is one of these very undervalued elements. And what I would strongly suggest is that you try and think of e-learning in a different way. Think about that content, practice, and then knowledge check at the end. And I think you'll find 1,000,001 ways to use e-learning. So thank you very much for listening.